On June 23, 1944, over 31,000 Soviet guns and mortars roared to life across a 450-kilometer front. 12 days later, German Army Group Center had ceased to exist. The weapon that anchored the most devastating barrage of the Eastern Front was not some secret superweapon. It was a gun-howitzer designed 7 years earlier, built for one purpose: erase the German bunkers, dugouts, and reverse slope positions that ordinary field guns could not touch. This is the story of the 152mm ML-20, the weapon that forced an entire army group into an impossible choice. Stay in your hole and die, or move constantly and lose the ability to mass fire. To understand why the ML-20 mattered, you have to understand what Soviet artillery could not do in 1941 and 1942. The 122mm M30 howitzer often lacked sufficient destructive power against German field fortifications. Soviet reports from various sectors in 1942 noted that standard caliber howitzers required prolonged fire against German log and earth bunkers, often failing to guarantee destruction of interior fighting crews despite damaging external structures. The 152mm M10 howitzer was more powerful, but it still struggled against reinforced fieldworks when Germans used thick timber revetments and layered earth cover. German positions along the Don approaches were organized into interconnected points of resistance that survived ordinary divisional artillery fire unless guns were given time, ammunition, and close observation. Soviet commanders repeatedly discovered that their existing heavy artillery could suppress and neutralize German firing points, but actual destruction was the hardest category to achieve against well-built field shelters. The Red Army needed a gun with more powerful charges, heavier shells, and better range than the older 152mm family, while remaining simpler and more mobile than the largest siege pieces. That was the problem on the table. The man who solved it changed the shape of every Soviet offensive that followed. Fyodor Fedorovich Petrov led the design team at Plant No. 172 in Perm during the Soviet artillery development program of the mid-1930s. The Artillery Directorate had issued a requirement to create a new 152mm gun howitzer with better ballistic performance and longer range than the M1910/34 lineage, while being suited to contemporary Soviet industrial methods and field mobility standards. The formal adoption decision came on September 22, 1937, when the Red Army adopted the 152mm gun howitzer M1937, factory designation ML-20. The requirement sought a weapon combining howitzer shell weight with gun range, replacing the outdated M1910/34, which descended from the pre-First World War Schneider-designed 6-inch siege gun family. Petrov's role as chief designer at Plant No. 172's Artillery Design Bureau placed him at the center of the design compromise between range, recoil, carriage strength, and mass. The specification called for a mobile field piece with long-range indirect fire capability and a barrel carriage combination manufacturable in Soviet industry without the heavy machining and exceptional complexity that had limited earlier attempts. But here is the part most people miss about how the ML-20 got built. Petrov did not start from scratch. His team used an existing and relatively mature 152mm barrel lineage, paired with a carriage concept derived from the 122mm M30 family, while fitting a muzzle brake to make the system compatible with the lighter carriage. This approach explicitly reduced development time, simplified production, and exploited existing manufacturing tooling and stock components. A weapon born from parts the Soviets already knew how to make. That decision would matter enormously when total war arrived. The 152.4mm caliber fired the OF-540 high-explosive projectile, weighing 43.56 kilograms, with 5.86 kilograms of TNT bursting charge. The separate loading ammunition system required the projectile to be loaded first, then the propellant cartridge case, enabling flexible charge selection for different ranges and targets. Muzzle velocity reached 655 meters per second for high explosive rounds, and 600 meters per second for BR-540 armor-piercing rounds, available for specialized missions. The combat weight of 7.27 tons and barrel length of 27 calibers made the weapon mobile enough for tractor tow while delivering superior range to the M1910/34. The split trail carriage provided wide traverse for field service, with maximum elevation of 65 degrees, enabling both direct and indirect fire missions. The 9-man crew could achieve 3 to 4 rounds per minute in short bursts through tightly sequenced drill. Shell lifted, shell rammed, charge inserted, breech closed, lay corrected, fire, repeat. The separate loading system distinguished the ML-20 as a gun-howitzer because its barrel length and chamber characteristics permitted higher initial velocity than pure howitzers, while retaining the elevation useful for indirect fire against fieldworks and reverse slope positions. The heavy projectile mass and separate charge prevented very high rates of fire, but well-practiced crew drill kept the piece lethal in the opening minutes of barrages. Maximum range extended to 17,230 meters, depending on ammunition table, placing enemy artillery positions and rear area targets squarely inside the effective envelope. That 17-kilometer reach is what would make Army Group Center's command system unworkable in the summer of 1944. If you find yourself wanting more deep dives into the weapons that actually decided the war on the Eastern Front, this channel posts a new one every week. The next beat is where the ML-20 stops being a specification and starts being a problem German commanders cannot solve. The ML-20 regiments deployed across the 4 fronts of Operation Bagration represented a key element of Soviet artillery doctrine. Concentrated firepower applied at decisive points rather than dispersed across sector boundaries. The 1st Baltic Front under Ivan Bagramian, 3rd Belarusian Front under Ivan Chernyakhovsky, 2nd Belarusian Front under Georgy Zakharov, and 1st Belarusian Front under Konstantin Rokossovsky each included heavy artillery units in their assault and breakthrough groupings. These formations operated in batteries of 4 guns, with regiments commonly fielding 12 guns and larger brigade groupings deploying 24 guns or more. Over 31,000 guns and mortars participated in the June 23, 1944 artillery preparation, with ML-20 batteries forming the core and Army heavy striking element, concentrated under front artillery reserves. Soviet doctrine deliberately used heavy 152mm guns to smash German strongpoints, gun positions, and dugouts before infantry assault, reversing the dispersed defensive positioning that had proven catastrophic in 1941. The concentration represented unprecedented artillery density on the Eastern Front, designed to overwhelm German defensive systems through sheer weight of fire. And that wasn't even the part that made the difference. German forces reported devastating Soviet artillery fire as a decisive factor in the destruction of command posts and artillery positions during Operation Bagration. The Bobruisk encirclement in late June saw heavy artillery batteries providing sustained fire support, systematically suppressing German breakout attempts and contributing to massive German surrenders in the pocket. The weapon's 17-kilometer maximum range enabled counter-battery suppression of German artillery positioned beyond the effective envelope of lighter divisional guns, while the 43.56 kilogram projectile delivered devastating effect against log and earth fortifications. The artillery preparation was not treated by German commanders as a generic nuisance. They characterized it as a decisive operational factor, breaking up command arrangements, disabling divisional artillery, and making forward command posts untenable. Soviet heavy artillery fire forced repeated relocation of headquarters, often several times daily, as German units discovered that dense forward command centers were immediately bracketed and destroyed. The ML-20's role in this systematic degradation of German command and control capabilities proved as important as its direct destruction of fortified positions. But the version you have heard about Bagration probably skips the part that broke the German army harder than any single barrage. German forces acknowledged Soviet heavy artillery as a major threat in reports from Operation Bagration, when combat summaries described Soviet heavy artillery fire as overwhelming fixed positions and paralyzing command systems. German countermeasures included deeper trenching, dispersed command posts, relocation to alternate positions, and continuous fortification work under bombardment. Command posts displaced repeatedly to avoid 152mm bracketing and destruction, and German artillery adopted shoot-and-scoot behavior that reduced firepower concentration in exchange for survivability. The German response demanded systematic abandonment of dense forward headquarters in favor of survivability through depth, concealment, and rapid displacement. Units deepened foxholes and trenches, constructed communication trenches, improved overhead cover with timber and earth, and split artillery batteries into smaller packets to avoid massed destruction. Where time permitted, engineers built shell-proof shelters. But the ML-20's range and shell weight forced Germans to choose between remaining immobile and accepting reduced efficiency through constant movement. German engineering and operations reporting repeatedly noted shifting command posts rearward, using woods and villages as temporary headquarters, and constructing deeper positions under extreme pressure and short notice. The weapon that had been designed to compel exactly this behavior succeeded in forcing Germans to trade firepower concentration for survivability, reducing their ability to mass fire rapidly while imposing continuous engineering demands. Every relocation meant additional transport demand, additional camouflage labor, and additional engineer work. The Soviet artillery had imposed a constant engineering tax on the German defense. Pay attention to this next number, because it explains the whole war on the Eastern Front. Plant number 172 in Perm produced approximately 6,884 ML-20s in total. Soviet mass production absolutely dwarfed German production in heavy artillery, and the ML-20's production economy came from component commonality, use of existing barrel family, and adapted M30 carriage components that reduced manufacturing burden compared with entirely new heavy gun development. Therefore, German countermeasures required massive diversion of engineering manpower, timber, steel, and transport from defensive construction into emergency deepening, dispersion, and relocation work. Each German position reconstruction under fire consumed thousands of man-hours per core sector, multiplying because artillery forced engineers to rebuild shelters, recut trenches, repair communications, and move stores and headquarters continuously. The industrial asymmetry was grotesque. The Soviet Union built a weapon optimized for manufacturing economy, while forcing Germany to spend exponentially more resources defending against it. The fortification system built to stop the Soviets had already consumed vast resources. Then Soviet 152mm bombardments forced Germans to spend even more just to keep defensive lines functioning. The ML-20 design optimized for manufacturing economy through reuse of existing barrel lineage and adapted carriage components. But German defensive adaptations demanded steel tonnage, man-hours, and retrofits that exceeded the weapon's production cost by orders of magnitude. The recurring industrial and labor cost, measured in large-scale diversion of engineering resources, created a strategic drain that Germany could not sustain while simultaneously maintaining offensive capability and replacing combat losses. The 152mm gun-howitzer M1937 remained in Soviet service well into the post-war period, generating the ML-20S self-propelled variants that armed the Su-152 and ISU-152 assault guns developed during 1943. Finland operated captured Soviet M10 howitzers under the designation 152H38, and the weapon's barrel family became the foundation for multiple Soviet self-propelled artillery applications, extending its combat relevance beyond the original towed configuration. The Su-152 earned its Zveroboy reputation, mounting the ML-20S on the KV-1S heavy tank chassis, while the ISU-152 used the same gun-howitzer on the IS heavy tank platform. Both vehicles entered combat in 1943, with the Su-152 completing wartime production and the ISU-152 continuing limited post-war manufacture. The separate loading ammunition system that enabled tactical flexibility in towed service translated directly to self-propelled mounts, creating a unified ammunition family across multiple platforms. Regional conflicts have featured Soviet-origin 152mm artillery systems in subsequent decades, with examples appearing in various conflicts and civil wars. Some ISU-152s have appeared in modern conflicts, demonstrating the weapon's enduring presence in global arsenals 7 decades after its adoption. The ML-20 succeeded through relentless adequacy rather than technical sophistication. Manufacturable under wartime conditions, effective enough to justify frontline distribution, durable enough to outlast the regime that commissioned it. Soviet artillery requirements in 1941 had demanded the creation of a weapon that proved fundamental enough to serve across multiple platforms and conflicts, receiving continued adaptation and development throughout its service life. 12 days, 450 kilometers, an entire German army group erased from the order of battle. The 31,000 guns that opened fire on June 23, 1944, were the loudest demonstration of an idea Petrov had drawn on paper 7 years earlier in a Perm design bureau. Build a weapon your factories can actually make, and the math of war starts to bend in your favor. If you want the story of the assault guns, the ML-20 fathered, the Su-152 and the ISU-152, that German tank crews learned to fear, that video is on screen right now. Subscribe, and the next Eastern Front breakdown lands in your feed next week.